Imagine, imagine your pastor standing right at a hospital bed.
Oh, okay.
A family member. Is there someone who, maybe they grew up in the church, but they haven't been to a service in a decade?
Right. A very common scenario.
Exactly. And they are terrified. The monitor is beeping. They look at the pastor and they ask for communion.
Man, that is a heavy moment.
It is.
Yeah.
And if your pastor says yes, well, he might actually be violating a formally adopted synod resolution on fellowship.
Yeah, he could be crossing a major institutional line.
Right. But if he says no, he might break a family right there, just, crush a bruised reed. The tension in that tiny hospital room is just unbearable.
It really is.
And the craziest part to me, the guidelines dictating what happens in that intimate, agonizing moment, they aren't being written in the hospital.
No, they certainly aren't.
They're being argued over literally right now in a massive convention hall in Phoenix, Arizona.
It is the ultimate collision, of high theology and boots-on-the-ground reality.
Yeah.
We like to think of theology as this, this pristine academic pursuit. Like, it's just ideas.
Just books on a shelf somewhere.
Right. But the moment you put it into an institution, the moment you start writing bylaws, it becomes an instrument of governance.
It has teeth.
It does. It dictates who gets care, who gets disciplined, and, well, where the boundaries of the family are actually drawn.
So welcome to the deep dive. We are putting you right in the middle of that convention hall.
That's right.
You, the listener, you are our target today. Imagine you are a pastoral or a lay delegate for the 2026 LCMS Convention.
You've got your badge on.
Yep, you've packed your bags, you're feeling that dry Arizona heat, and you are staring at a massive, incredibly dense binder of resolutions.
It's hundreds of pages.
And your assignment today, Floor Committee 5, Theology and Church Relations.
Which is affectionately or perhaps fearfully known as the doctrinal strike zone.
The doctrinal strike zone, I love that.
Committee 5 is where the foundational identity of the synod is hammered out. It's the big stuff.
It is, and we are not here to just, read down a table of contents for you. You can do that on your flight.
Please don't make us do that.
Right. We are operating as your dedicated research assistants. We're taking the 14 resolutions sitting in today's business, issue 1, and we are going to tear them apart.
We want to see how they actually work mechanically.
We are looking for the mechanisms. We want to know the why and the how, not just the what.
And to do that effectively, we're adopting a very specific analytical framework for this session.
A lens to look through.
Exactly. We're calling it Kingdom over Castle. It is a diagnostic tool.
Okay, break that down for us.
So when you look at any massive church body, whether it's the LCMS or any other historical denomination, there is a constant, inevitable tension.
Between the kingdom and the castle.
Right. The kingdom is the living, breathing, outward-moving, frankly messy reality of the gospel on the ground.
Real people in real pews.
Yeah. And the castle. That is the institution. It's the bureaucracy.
The headquarters.
The headquarters, the bylaws, the defensive walls, designed to protect the theology.
And to be fair, you need a castle. You do need walls to protect the treasury.
Absolutely. You can't just have chaos.
But the danger is when the castle starts demanding that the kingdom serve it.
Yes. When the structure becomes more important than the mission.
So as we look at these resolutions, we are going to apply a deliberate stress test. We are going to explicitly assume bad motives.
Which sounds harsh, but it's necessary.
Right. We aren't saying the authors of these documents are actually malicious. We are saying that if you want to find the structural flaws in a bridge...
You drive heavy trucks over it.
Exactly. If you want to find the flaws in a bylaw, you assume the worst possible person is in charge of enforcing it.
You have to ask, where does the power flow? Who gets cut off? Where's the actual accountability?
It's the only way a delegate can vote responsibly. You have to evaluate the incentives.
Are we creating a culture of low control and high accountability, where local pastors and missionaries are equipped and trusted?
Or are we looking at a power grab hiding behind very polite, very orthodox theological language?
That is the million-dollar question.
So let's start by looking at the borders of the map. Before we get into the sanctuary, let's talk about foreign policy.
How the synod decides who is actually in the family.
Yeah. We've got a cluster of resolutions here dealing with global partnerships. Let's start with Bolivia and Australia.
Two very different situations.
Completely different mechanisms of how church relations operate in the real world. Let's start with Bolivia. Resolution 501.
Okay, so this one is about formalizing a new friendship. It establishes official altar and pulpit fellowship with the Evangelical Lutheran Christian Church of Bolivia, the ICL.
And mechanically, what does that mean on the ground?
It means an LCMS pastor can preach in a Bolivian pulpit, and a Bolivian member can commune at an LCMS altar.
Wow, okay.
It's the highest level of ecclesiastical intimacy.
And when you read the preamble to this proposal, the authors lean really heavily on the missional need.
They do. They are essentially saying, look at the gospel work happening here. We need to lock arms.
It's a beautifully outward, kingdom-focused posture. It names real places and real missionaries, but, putting on our research assistant hat.
There's a glaring mechanical issue in the binder.
There really is. Did you see it?
I did. It's a massive structural assumption.
Explain that.
So, a fellowship declaration of this magnitude requires a rigorous, exhaustive theological audit by the Commission on Theology and Church Relations.
CTCR.
Right. They have to prove that the Bolivian church agrees with the LCMS on every single core doctrinal point.
Which makes sense. You need to know you believe the same things.
But if you flip through the source documents provided to the delegates in today's business, the actual CTCR report isn't there.
It's just missing. So the castle is basically telling the kingdom, hey, trust us, the paperwork is in order, just vote yes.
Exactly. As a delegate, your first move at the microphone should be to ask for the data.
Right. Just step up and say, I love the idea of fellowship with Bolivia, but where is the audit?
Exactly. Though, that said, structurally, this is a very healthy resolution.
Because it's low control.
Right.
Yep.
The Synod isn't micromanaging the Bolivian church. It's simply opening a door so that local LCMS congregations can partner with them, send mission teams, and collaborate organically.
Now, contrast that joyful expansion with what's happening in Australia. Resolution 502.
The Lutheran Mission Australia or the LMA?
This is a completely different mechanism. This isn't just making a new friend. This is deploying a lifeboat.
It really is. And this requires a bit of global historical context for the delegate.
Set the stage for us.
The broader Lutheran Church of Australia, with which the LCMS has had deep historic ties, recently made the decision to ordain women.
Which is a huge shift.
In the ecosystem of global confessional Lutheranism, that is a massive fracture point. It immediately triggers a break in fellowship.
So the LMA is the confessional remnant.
Yes. They are the pastors and congregations who said, we cannot go along with this, and essentially had to walk away and start over from scratch.
So this resolution officially grants them fellowship. It uses doctrine as a strict boundary against the practice of the former body, but it uses it to create a living sanctuary for these displaced Lutherans.
It's a very clear law and gospel dynamic.
But here is where the friction comes in for me. The resolution doesn't just say, we recognize you.
No, it goes further.
It explicitly directs LCMS leadership to assist them with their ecclesiastical structures.
And that, my friend, is a loaded phrase.
Right. Assist with ecclesiastical structures. What does that actually mean mechanically?
That's the question you have to ask on the floor.
Are we talking about, like, sending them a PDF of Robert's Rules of Order? Or are we talking about the Board for International Mission writing a blank check to build a seminary in Sydney?
Building a denomination from the ground up requires massive capital.
What are the financial implications of this?
That is precisely the kind of systemic question a delegate has to ask. When the castle commits the kingdom to structural assistance, the funding has to come from somewhere.
It implies sending personnel, maybe legal aid, theological professors.
And yes, likely real funding. It's high accountability to confessional standards, which is commendable, but the financial accountability in the text is totally opaque.
But if we pull back for a second, this is a fascinating moment for the LCMS.
It's a huge pivot.
They're choosing theological fidelity over historical institutional loyalty. They are walking away from the established wealthy institution in Australia and choosing to support the scrappy remnant.
Because the theology demands it.
That is a massive kingdom over castle move.
It is. Which leads us perfectly into the resolution regarding Sweden. Resolution 503.
The mission province in Sweden.
They are in a very similar boat. A confessional remnant in a hyper-secularized European landscape, completely marginalized by the state church.
But this resolution operates on a completely different frequency than the Australia one.
It does. It doesn't ask for money. It doesn't change a bylaw. It is purely a formal expression of gratitude and a call for prayer.
It's the institutional equivalent of a long-distance hug.
I like that. And you might ask, why bother convention delegates with a symbolic resolution? Why take up floor time?
Right. Why not just send an email?
Because in international church relations, visibility is oxygen.
Visibility is oxygen. That's good.
For a small, persecuted church body in Sweden, having a 2 million member American denomination officially say, "We see you, we thank God for you, and we are praying for you," that provides immense diplomatic and spiritual leverage.
It's a brilliant, low-stakes, high-value move.
It really is kingdom building at its finest.
Okay, so that's how the Synod embraces people. It's warm, it's supportive. But what happens when the borders are threatened?
This is where the machinery gets dark.
What happens when an international partner starts drifting? Let's look at Resolution 504 to address concerns with partner churches.
When an institution feels culturally or theologically threatened, the immediate reflex is to centralize power.
Every single time.
This resolution is the Synod pulling the emergency brake from the boardroom so they don't have to wait for the congregation to catch up.
Let's break down the mechanics of this, because the preamble paints a pretty grim picture.
It vaguely references a small number of partner churches. They're engaging in unionism, ordaining women, or jumping ship to the Lutheran World Federation.
The tension here is palpable, but notice what it doesn't do.
What's that?
It doesn't name them. It doesn't say, here is the specific issue with Church X. It keeps the crisis totally ambiguous and bureaucratic.
Which is the first red flag of castle building.
Yeah.
When you legislate based on unnamed enemies, you write overly broad laws.
So what mechanism does this resolution actually create?
It creates a step-by-step pipeline for church discipline. It directs the LCMS president and the CTCR to issue formal admonitions, and if those fail, to unilaterally recommend suspension of fellowship.
Let's pause and look at what a formal admonition actually does in the real world. This isn't just a politely worded email, is it?
Not at all. When the president issues an admonition, it works like a diplomatic freeze.
Wow.
It signals to the various boards, the Board for International Mission, the seminaries, that this partner is radioactive. Funding might pause. Pastoral exchanges stop.
So it sends a shockwave through the mission field long before a single vote is ever cast by the congregations.
Exactly. And here's where we apply the bad motive stress test.
Yeah.
This resolution fundamentally alters the flow of authority.
How so?
Historically, severing fellowship is a massive, agonizing process that requires the consent of the whole church in convention. It's a big deal.
But this resolution
streamlines that power directly into the office of the president and the CTCR.
Okay, I'm going to play devil's advocate here. Let's say I'm a pragmatic administrator. I would argue, look, you can't have 6,000 congregations debating foreign policy for 3 years while a partner church is actively ordaining women and causing scandal.
Sure, takes too long.
Right. We need an executive mechanism to stop the bleeding immediately. I mean, efficiency matters, doesn't it?
Efficiency is the language of the castle.
Oh, wow.
Accountability is the language of the kingdom. Yes, you absolutely need a mechanism to address heresy, but the cost of this efficiency is the total disenfranchisement of the local church.
Give me an example of how that plays out.
What if a local LCMS district has a 50-year, deep-rooted mission partnership with one of these unnamed churches? They send teams every summer, they fund orphanages, they know the people.
Amen.
Suddenly, an executive order from St. Louis severs that relationship, and the local congregation has zero input, no timeline, and no appeals process.
Let's just get cut off. So if I'm a delegate sitting on the floor in Phoenix, what is the play here? Because I don't want to vote against doctrinal purity, but I also don't want to hand over the keys to the kingdom.
You use the amendment process.
Okay.
A delegate should step to the microphone and propose an amendment that requires any suspension of fellowship to be debated and ratified by the convention in session.
Keep the final say with the voters.
Exactly. You can allow the president to issue the admonition, to wave the yellow flag, so to speak, but the red card has to be pulled by the voting delegates representing the local congregations.
You keep the high accountability to doctrine, but you decentralize the control. I love that. That is how you use the parliamentary rules to protect the local church.
Precisely.
Now, speaking of the nuances of international diplomacy, we have to talk about the sister church resolution, Resolution 507.
Oh, this one. This is perhaps the most painfully bureaucratic text in the entire binder.
It is. The resolution asks the Commission on Handbook to spend 3 years studying whether the LCMS should stop using the term sister church to describe its international partners.
And propose a new, legally precise term by 2029.
My immediate reaction to this was, this is like realizing you've been calling your second cousin your sister for your entire life, and suddenly you hire a corporate lawyer to figure out what to put on the family reunion name tags.
That is exactly what this is.
Why is this even a resolution?
Because words imply liability and authority. The term sister church implies a level of formal equality, mutual accountability, and perhaps even legal entanglement that simply doesn't exist with all of the synod's partners.
Right, because the partners are so different.
Exactly. Some are massive, wealthy European state churches. Others are tiny, emerging church bodies in Africa. The lawyers and the ecumenical officers are looking at the term sister and panicking because it's just too messy.
But the danger here, and this is where the castle blindly tramples the kingdom, is the relational fallout.
The human element.
Right. If you have been calling a small African church body your sister for 30 years, and suddenly the lawyers in St. Louis decide to downgrade them to an associated contractual body,
Or whatever sterile term they come up with.
yeah, they're going to be deeply hurt. It communicates a chilling institutional distance.
Precisely. And notice the mechanism here. It refers the issue for a 3-year internal study by the Commission on Handbook.
A committee studying a word.
Yeah. Delegates need to ask a very pointed question on the floor. What input will the partner churches actually have in this study?
Are we going to let the lawyers rename the family without asking the family?
Exactly.
Okay, we've spent a lot of time on the international map. We've looked at how the synod draws lines across oceans. Let's zoom way in. Let's look at the hardest line a pastor ever has to draw.
Not in Bolivia, not in Australia.
Right at the communion rail. We were transitioning to cluster 2, the altar and the lectern.
And this brings us right back to the hospital room scenario we opened the session with.
Resolution 505, to address open communion and pastoral exceptions in extraordinary circumstances.
This might be the single most consequential resolution for the everyday layperson.
Absolutely. The LCMS practices closed communion, meaning you only instruct and admit those who are unified in confession. But this resolution openly acknowledges that pastors face incredibly complex, bleeding, real-world edge cases.
The hospital deathbed, the wedding with a divided family, the Alzheimer's patient.
Yeah. And it directs the CTCR and the Council of Presidents, the COP2, write specific guidelines on how pastors should handle these exceptions.
The authors of this text are wrestling with a nightmare scenario. You have two massive theological pillars violently colliding.
What are they?
On one hand, you have the severe, terrifying scriptural warnings against the unworthy reception of the sacrament. Paul writes that eating and drinking without discerning the body brings judgment.
That's a heavy law warning.
Right. But on the other hand, you have the gospel reality that the sacrament is given precisely for the comfort of terrified consciences.
The bruised reed again. So the mechanism here is fascinating. Instead of the convention just passing a heavy-handed rule saying no exceptions ever, punish the deviants, it acknowledges the burden on the local pastor.
It seeks to build a framework to help him.
But this is where the assume bad motives lens is absolutely critical. What happens when a pastoral framework turns into an institutional checklist?
That is the danger.
If the CTCR and the COP write these guidelines poorly, they will become a rigid, legalistic weapon.
The district president could take this new checklist, walk into a local congregation, and use it to punish a pastor who used his God-given, boots-on-the-ground discretion to commune someone in an ICU.
It's the tension between providing a safety net and building a cage. If I am the pastor, I want the synod to have my back when I make a tough call. I don't want to be looking over my shoulder wondering if I filled out the extraordinary circumstance form in triplicate.
And mechanically, there are two massive holes in this resolution that delegates must fix.
What's the first one?
There is no deadline.
Seriously?
Yeah. They are authorizing the creation of guidelines, but they aren't saying when they are due. This could sit in committee for a decade while pastors continue to bleed out at the rail trying to figure this out.
So a delegate needs to amend the resolution to demand the guidelines be presented by, say, the 2029 convention.
Exactly. Force a timeline. And second, who is writing it?
It says the CTCR and the COP.
Right. But who actually trains the pastors for these moments?
The seminary.
The seminaries. The professors of pastoral care. If you don't mandate that the seminary faculties are involved in writing these guidelines, you are letting bureaucrats write the rules for the emergency room.
Wow. Okay, keep the bureaucrats out of the ER. That makes total sense. Now let's move 3 feet over from the altar to the lectern. Resolution 509.
The resolution on the public reading of Scripture.
This one is going to generate intense friction on the floor.
Oh, definitely.
The text reaffirms that pastors should normally be the ones reading Scripture in church, but it makes a pragmatic concession. It allows qualified laymen to read in exceptional cases.
Well, there's a catch.
A big one. It explicitly discourages women from serving as lectors, and then tells the CTCR to write a comprehensive study document about the whole theology of reading Scripture publicly.
The theological rationale operating the background here relies on 1 Timothy 2 and the doctrine of the pastoral office.
Right.
The assumption is that the public authoritative reading of the Word is inherently tied to the office of the holy ministry, or at the very least, tied to male headship within the gathered congregation.
But wait, I have to push back here because the internal logic of the mechanism seems broken to me.
Let's hear it.
If the synod is saying that reading the Bible out loud is exercising the pastoral office, then laymen shouldn't be allowed to do it either.
Correct.
Only ordained pastors should do it. But they make a concession for laymen, which means they acknowledge that reading the Bible out loud is not inherently the pastoral office.
That's the logical conclusion, yes.
So what exactly is the theological mechanism that excludes women? If it's not the pastoral office, is it just general, undefinable authority?
You have just articulated the exact theological corner the synod is backing itself into. By making a pragmatic concession for small rural churches that might not have a pastor present, they allow laymen to read. But by doing so, they decouple the act of reading from the pastoral office, which makes the exclusion of women look less like a coherent theology of ordination and more like an arbitrary exercise of patriarchal control.
And think about the mechanism of implementation. This is an incredibly high control move. It completely overrides local congregational practice.
It creates unnecessary local wars.
Imagine the pastoral nightmare this creates. You have a congregation where a woman, let's call her Susan, has beautifully and faithfully read the Old Testament lesson every Sunday for 15 years.
Very common in many parishes.
Suddenly, the pastor has to pull her aside and say, Susan, you can't read anymore because a convention in Phoenix voted to discourage it.
But let's look at the sequencing of the resolution, because this is where the castle really shows its hand.
What do you mean?
It combines an immediate discouragement with a delayed study.
Right. They are telling congregations to stop doing it right now, but they are telling the CTCR to figure out the theology of why later.
It is institutional malpractice. You don't build the wall before you survey the property line.
So what should a kingdom-focused delegate do?
Step to the microphone and propose a substitute motion. Say, we commission the CTCR study, and we will debate the findings and any resulting restrictions at the 2029 convention.
You demand theological clarity before you impose structural control. I love that. Don't let the institution enforce a rule it hasn't fully articulated yet.
Exactly.
Okay, we've covered the borders of the church and we've covered the sanctuary. Now we are stepping out the front doors of the church and directly into the cultural and medical reality of the 21st century.
Cluster 3. Gender, vocation, and bioethics.
These are the resolutions where theology stops being an internal debate and violently collides with the world. Let's start with the resolutions on gender. There are two here that operate in tandem.
Resolution 508 and 512.
Right. Resolution 508 reaffirms the Synod's historical positions on the complementary roles of men and women, pushing back against societal pressures. It directs the seminaries and boards to update their teaching resources.
And then Resolution 512 officially concludes the created male and female task force, receives its final report on gender identity and dysphoria, and directs synod boards to actually use the materials they produced.
The contrast between the posture of these resolutions and the culture at large is just staggering.
It is. The church is looking at a society that has fundamentally decoupled biology from identity, and the church is trying to hold a deeply historical creational line.
But notice the difference in how these two resolutions operate mechanically. Resolution 508 is defensive.
It's the castle shouting for the battlements, hold the line, men are men, women are women.
Yeah. It's law-heavy, though it tries to emphasize the goodness of God's design. But it just tells pastors to teach better without giving them a timeline for when the updated resources will actually arrive.
It's handing a soldier a manual that says, win the war, but forgetting to give them a rifle.
Exactly. But Resolution 512, however, is an entirely different beast. This is one of the most outward kingdom-focused mechanisms in the entire binder.
I agree completely. Because the task force on gender identity isn't just releasing a statement of condemnation.
No.
They are dealing with the agonizing pastoral reality of gender dysphoria. They are providing actual, usable materials for schools, for teachers, for parents whose teenagers are suddenly experiencing profound confusion.
It treats the doctrine of creation not just as a boundary to defend, but as a mechanism for pastoral care, for hurting people.
It shifts the issue from a temporary theoretical study committee into permanent structural programming for the Board for National Mission. The castle is actually building tools for the kingdom to use in the field.
But as a diligent research assistant, I have to ask, what is the catch?
The catch is visibility.
Ah.
The resolution commends the task force's report and tells everyone to use it. But delegates rarely get to see the full exhaustive reports before they vote.
So they are voting blind.
Yes. A delegate must demand that the executive summary of these recommendations is published clearly in the daily convention proceedings. You cannot blind vote to implement a pastoral care strategy you haven't read.
Trust, but verify. I like it. Okay, we are moving from the cultural battlefield to the intensive care unit. Let's talk about bioethics.
Resolution 510.
To request Commission on Theology and Church Relations report on human organ donation and transplantation.
This is an incredibly necessary piece of work.
Why now?
Because the medical technology around organ transplantation, living donors, and specifically the criteria for brain death has advanced light years beyond the church's legacy documentation.
It's all moving so fast.
Families are sitting in sterile waiting rooms facing an agonizing choice about turning off a ventilator, and they are desperate for ethical theological guidance rooted in the sanctity of life.
So the mechanism here is simple. Assign the CTCR to study it and write a report. It's supportive, it's low control. What could possibly be the problem with this?
The problem is hubris.
Hubris.
The resolution assigns this incredibly complex medical ethics issue to a room full of brilliant, faithful theologians. But there is no explicit requirement in the text for them to consult with medical professionals.
Wait, really?
Really?
You cannot have theologians deciding the ethical validity of brain death criteria without a neurologist in the room. That's insane.
Exactly. The mechanism is flawed because it assumes theology can operate in a vacuum independent of biological reality.
So what's the fix?
Delegates must amend this resolution to mandate collaboration with Christian bioethicists, neurologists, and transplant surgeons.
That seems obvious.
And furthermore, just like the communion guidelines, there is no deadline. If a family is making a decision today, a report published in 2032 doesn't help them.
They need it now. Which brings us to the heaviest, most emotionally fraught resolution we will discuss today. Resolution 511.
To reaffirm the sanctity of human life regarding the practice of in vitro fertilization.
We need to tread with immense pastoral sensitivity here because the implications of this text will fundamentally alter the lives of families in the pews.
We really do.
Let's break down exactly what this resolution does, both theologically and mechanically. It declares unequivocally that embryos created through IVF are human beings.
That's the baseline.
Therefore, it formally opposes any practices that freeze, indefinitely store, or discard them, arguing that this violates the fifth commandment, thou shalt not murder.
Right.
And it directs synod entities to create resources to counsel couples facing infertility toward ethical alternatives.
To understand the gravity of this, you have to understand the biological mechanism of IVF that the theology is reacting to.
Right, the nuts and bolts of the procedure.
To increase the success rate of a deeply expensive and painful procedure, IVF clinics routinely hyperstimulate the ovaries, retrieve multiple eggs, and fertilize all of them. The best embryos are implanted, and the surplus embryos are frozen in liquid nitrogen.
And often they are eventually discarded or donated to science.
Exactly. The theology of the LCMS looks at that biological reality and says those are not medical waste, those are microscopic human lives.
But the assumption baked into the preamble of this resolution is absolutely heartbreaking. The authors recognize that many LCMS members have already utilized IVF to build their families.
And they likely did so completely unaware of the theological implications regarding the surplus embryos.
Their local pastor may have never preached on it. They just wanted a baby.
So you have a situation where the synod is about to pass a resolution that effectively tells thousands of grieving, infertile couples who finally had a child through IVF, your frozen embryos are your children, and keeping them on ice or destroying them is a grave sin.
It is dropping a theological bomb into the middle of a congregation.
It is.
Now, the resolution tries to balance this. It explicitly applies the law, calling the practice sinful. But it leans heavily into the gospel, demanding a compassionate pastoral response and offering the absolute comfort of forgiveness.
But look at the mechanism of implementation. The castle is dropping the bomb, but they are failing to provide the bomb squad.
What do you mean?
The resolution directs the Life Ministry and the CTCR to develop counseling resources for pastors. But again, there is no timeline.
If a weeping couple walks into their pastor's office on Monday morning after this convention and says, "We have 4 frozen embryos in a clinic in Chicago, what do we do?"
The pastor has nothing to give them.
The synod hasn't written the resources yet.
That is a catastrophic failure of the institution to serve the local church. If you are going to draw a hard, necessary theological boundary that causes immense pain, you must simultaneously provide the pastoral care framework.
You can't just leave them hanging.
Delegates must amend this to demand a strict, immediate timeline for these resources.
But there's an even bigger hole here, isn't there? The resolution urges support for ethical alternatives like traditional adoption. But it completely fails to mention the only ethical solution for the embryos that already exist.
Yes, embryo adoption.
Yeah.
If the theology states that these frozen embryos are human lives, then the ethical imperative is to rescue them. There are organizations dedicated to allowing couples to adopt and gestate these abandoned embryos. The resolution must provide a pathway for that. You cannot close the door on IVF without opening the window of embryo adoption.
Delegates must amend the text to explicitly promote and resource embryo adoption. That is how you turn a heavy, law-driven resolution into a life-giving, kingdom-expanding reality.
It's essential.
Okay. Take a breath. We are moving into our final section, Cluster 4, Governance, Control, and Confessional Anchors. We've spent the entire session talking about how theology impacts the mission field, the communion rail, the hospital room, and the fertility clinic.
But how does the synod actually control the theology itself? Who gets to ask the questions?
Now we are looking at the bare metal plumbing of the institution. Resolution 506, to amend bylaw 3.9.5.2.2.
Try saying that 3 times fast.
I'm going to translate the bylaw numbers into plain English. This resolution changes the rules to explicitly stop the CTCR from giving theological advisory opinions to individual members of the synod.
A huge shift in access.
Right. If you are a layperson sitting in a pew or even an individual pastor, and you have a complex theological question, you can no longer just write to the theologians in St. Louis. You now have to route your question through official bureaucratic channels like your district president.
The preamble attempts to justify this by claiming a governance concern. It argues that individual, informal opinions from the CTCR are being weaponized in local disputes.
Like, well, the head theologian sent me an email saying I'm right and the church council is wrong.
Exactly. The assumption is that the CTCR is either overwhelmed with mail or that their informal advice is causing administrative chaos.
But let's use a mechanical analogy to explain what's actually happening here. This is like a massive corporation deciding to install a strict IT ticketing system.
Oh, perfect analogy.
It used to be that if a low-level worker had a complex structural question, they could just walk down the hall, knock on the chief engineer's door, and get an answer. It was relational. Now the corporation says, no, you must submit a ticket to your middle manager. And the middle manager will decide if your question is important enough to escalate to the engineer.
I will go incredibly hard on the bad motives lens here. This is the absolute textbook definition of castle over kingdom.
It really is.
It is an inward defensive move designed to protect the institution's inbox at the expense of the individual's conscience. It puts a massive bureaucratic firewall between the sheep and the shepherds.
It totally consolidates theological access into the hands of middle management. The district presidents become the gatekeepers of theological inquiry.
It protects the synod structure from the congregations instead of protecting the congregations from error. If a layperson is experiencing a genuine doctrinal crisis, perhaps their local pastor is actually teaching something unorthodox. How do they get help?
This bylaw cuts off a practical pathway for local theological clarity. It is incredibly high control, with practically zero accountability to the individual member.
Delegates have to scrutinize this on the floor. Does this protect the gospel, or does it just protect the executives? Why sever the connection between the church's finest theological minds and the people in the pews who actually fund them?
So what's the floor strategy?
A delegate should absolutely move to refer this back to committee, or amend it to ensure there is a bypass mechanism, a way that a district president cannot arbitrarily block a genuine, urgent theological inquiry from reaching the CTCR.
We are entering the home stretch. Resolution 513 is a breath of fresh air.
Finally.
To give thanks to God for the 1700th anniversary of the First Council of Nicaea.
This is the anchor. Nicaea in 325 AD is where the church hammered out the absolute foundational confession of who Christ is, true God, begotten from the Father.
It encourages churches to study and use the Nicene Creed. It's purely an identity formation piece. It links modern Lutherans in Arizona to the historic church fathers in the 4th century. Doctrine functioning as the living song of the church across millennia. No bylaw changes, no power grabs. Just a beautiful reminder that the LCMS is part of the one holy, Catholic, and apostolic church.
This will likely pass unanimously on the consent calendar, as it absolutely should.
And finally, we end in the graveyard. Resolution 514, to respectfully decline overtures.
Every convention has one of these.
A housekeeping resolution that officially rejects the dozens of overtures sent by congregations that the committee decided not to bring to the floor. They thank the submitters, but basically say, no thanks.
It is a procedural necessity to clear the docket. But, if you assume bad motives, you always check the graveyard to see what the castle swept under the rug.
And there's some fascinating bodies buried here. They declined an overture that asked to rephrase the descent into hell clause in the Apostles' Creed.
Which makes sense. The committee correctly noted that doing so would violate the standards set by the 1580 Book of Concord.
But look at the next one. They declined an overture asking the Synod to publicly acknowledge and repent of theological and administrative errors made during the COVID-19 response.
Wow. Talk about institutional self-protection.
The trauma of how the church handled lockdowns, communion, and state overreach is still a massive open wound in many congregations. And the committee's response is just to procedurally dismiss it.
Which is exactly why delegates have to read the fine print in their binders. You have to ensure nothing vital was dismissed that actually deserves a full hearing on the floor.
Okay, let's pull all of this together. We've spent an hour deep diving into Floor Committee 5. It is a massive, complex, sometimes contradictory mix of governance.
It really is.
You have these beautiful kingdom-building efforts like extending fellowship to the remnant in Australia and building pastoral care frameworks for gender dysphoria. But right next to them, you have rigid, castle-building maneuvers.
Like centralizing the power to suspend international partners, restricting who can read the Bible in church without a clear theological rationale, and cutting off lay people's access to the CTCR.
Your job as a delegate in Phoenix is to ruthlessly evaluate the incentives behind every single resolve clause you vote on. Are we creating rules that serve the mission field, that equip the local pastor, that bind up the brokenhearted?
Or are we creating a system where the local pastor and the layperson are forced to serve the rule book?
Are we handing out shields for the battle, or are we just shouting orders from behind the safety of the castle walls? That is the ultimate question.
It is.
So, I want to leave you, our listener, with a final provocative thought to chew on as you pack your binder and head to the airport.
Let's hear it.
If a church body spends all its energy, all its political capital, and all its resources building a perfectly secure, airtight, bureaucratic castle to protect its theology, do they risk isolating the very people, the lay people, the hurting families, the marginalized international partners, that the theology is actually meant to save?
Does absolute institutional control eventually suffocate a living confession?
That is the defining question for the 2026 convention. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Hit that convention floor with your eyes wide open and ask the hard questions. We'll see you next time.